Part 1.
You are going to hear a conversation. Before you listen, please look at questions 1 to 10. Now listen to the conversation and answer questions 1 to 10.
Well, I see from your CV, Cindy, that you studied at Central University. How could you find it there?
I had a great time. The teaching was great, and I made a lot of great friends. The psychology department was a great place.
So, how have you chosen psychology?
Well, at first, I didn't have any clear idea of what I wanted to do after university. I didn't say to myself, I want to be a clinical psychologist or a researcher or anything like that, I suppose. I've just always been interested in people and the way they act. I wanted to know why people think and act the way they do. Fascinating.
And what was the course like?
Like I said, it was just great. The teachers were all really friendly, and they had this special approach to teaching. You know, they didn't just give us lectures and tell us to read books, like what they might do in some more traditional places. The whole course was based on a problem-solving approach. You know, they'd describe a particular situation to us, and we'd speculate about what might happen. After that, we'd do the reading and see that it confirmed our own ideas. That's what I like best, the really practical orientation of the course. I learned very well with that style, so for me, it was just great.
I see from your CV that you graduated in 1986, and after that, let me see...
I got a job with the Department of Employment. It was only a temporary thing, about 6 months. I was a researcher in the department. I used to have to design questionnaires and things like that for surveys that they carried out. We'd design a survey, go out to the lectures and ask all the questions to the workers and the management, then go back to the office and analyse all the data. It was really interesting. And I guess the psychology course at college helped me a lot. We did a whole unit on statistical analysis, and that came in very useful for analysing the questionnaires and presenting the data in our reports. You know, I guess it really would have been very difficult if I hadn't had that kind of training.
And after that, you worked for 4 years in an advertising agency. That must have been a change from the Department of Employment, wasn't it?
Well, not really. I guess the office furnishings were a bit more sophisticated, but the job was fairly similar. I was basically still doing the same thing, designing questionnaires, going out, asking questions and marking reports. The only difference was that this time I wasn't asking people about their work. I was asking them what kind of washing powder they bought and if they preferred brand X to brand Y. Then I'd make up a report and the agency would use the information in their advertising campaigns. I enjoyed it a lot.
So, why did you leave?
Well, 4 years is a long time to be asking people, you know, those sorts of questions about washing powder and shampoo. No, seriously. After 2 years, I was in charge of the research department of the agency, and I had one assistant researcher. I guess after doing 2 years, that I suppose I felt, I know I can do this well, and now I want to do something else that's a little different. And there was nowhere for me to go inside the company. It just wasn't challenging for me anymore. And because I needed a challenge, I decided to move on. When I heard about the position of senior researcher here at the Institute, I thought, that's exactly what I want. The chance to combine my management skills and my research interests working in a much larger department with more varied work.
And you felt that the job description in our advertisement would offer you the kind of challenge you were looking for?
Exactly, yes. As I said, management in a larger organisation and research combined. Also, to be honest, I heard about the job before it was advertised. A friend of mine who works here in the publications section, John Pink, told me a few weeks ago that you were looking for someone to take over the job. He described the position to me in detail, and I thought that's exactly what I'm looking for. So really, I'd written my letter of application before the job was even advertised.
Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have 30 seconds to read questions
I should tell you that with the present cutbacks, we've only got one full-time administrative assistant in the section. How would you feel about doing your own word processing, typing, that sort of thing?
Oh, I'm used to that. I've done all my own word processing for ages. It's the only way to write, really, isn't it? I can type well, about 60 words a minute. I did a secretarial course after I left school, so I learned typing and shorthand, and then a few years later, I bought a PC, and I taught myself how to do word processing too.
Well, that's handy. Now, in the position you've applied for, you'd have 5 assistant researchers responsible to you. That's considerably more responsibility than you've had before, so you're obviously ambitious. And as you said you like a challenge, I was wondering what you see yourself doing in, say, 5 or 10 years down the track.
Oh, that's a difficult question. Let me try to answer your question this way. I'm particularly interested in experimental design and also teaching. I'd like to continue the organisation and planning side of research and do some teaching too. I know that you have lecturers here who do just that sort of thing, some practical work and some undergraduate teaching. So that's what really I'd be aiming for, to be a lecturer here at the Institute.
Well, that's certainly a career path that we'd encourage you to follow, but, of course, it might be necessary to upgrade your present qualification. I see from your CV that you've enrolled in an MA in experimental psychology. Could you tell me about the courses you're planning to take?
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2. You are going to hear a lecture. Before you listen, please look at questions 11 to 20. Now listen to the lecture and answer questions 11 to 20.
Good evening. I know many students are the proud owners of their first motor vehicle, and so do you. And this evening, I want to talk to you about some of the things you can do to make sure your car or motorbike isn't stolen. I'll start with a few facts and figures to put you in the picture. Car theft is a widespread problem. In this country alone, one car is stolen every 32 seconds. That's almost 1 million cars each year. And of those, 40% are never recovered. And don't think that just because your car might be a bit old and beaten up, no one will steal it. Any car can be stolen anywhere. Most thefts occur in residential areas, often from the front of the house or even from inside the garage. Some areas that are especially dangerous are shopping centres and parking lots, particularly at sports events. Most car thieves don't need to break into the car. They usually gain entry through unlocked doors, and many times they find the key in the ignition. In fact, 1 in 5 stolen cars had the keys left in the car. Isn't that amazing? 25% of drivers left the keys in the ignition of an unlocked car. Who steals cars? Well, there are basically 2 kinds of car and bike thieves: joyriders, aged about 15 to 21, and professionals. This last group usually needs less than 1 minute to break into a locked car, and they often steal cars to use in other crimes, such as robberies. You are much less likely to get your car back if it's stolen by a professional, and if it's stolen by a joyrider, chances are it'll be a wreck when you get it back. Joyriders have a very high accident rate. Now, since dusk to mid-evening are the peak hours for car theft, make sure you park in a well-lit area, preferably where there are plenty of passers-by, say near a busy store or restaurant.
Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have 30 seconds to read questions
What can you do to make sure your car isn't stolen? Well, first, and most obviously, lock the car when you leave it. That includes locking the boot or hatchback and making sure all the windows are closed. Even a tiny gap allows a thief to insert a wire to prise open the lock button. Of course, don't leave the keys hanging in the ignition. And don't conceal a spare key inside or outside the car. Thieves know all the hiding places. If your car breaks down, lock up before you go for help. And even if you can't start the car, a thief may be able to. Avoid leaving your keys with a garage or parking lot attendant. Choose the place you park yourself. Keep your driver's license and registration in your wallet or purse, not in the glove compartment of your car. You should also have a record of your car's vital statistics both in your wallet and somewhere at home. This can help with recovery in case of theft. And finally, it's a good idea to install some kind of safety device. There is a range available, from alarm systems that set off a buzzer or siren if an attempt is made to tamper with the car in any way, to fuel shut-off systems and time delay ignition systems. Displaying a warning sticker will also help deter would-be thieves. They don't want to waste time on trying to steal a protected car. So, help us put car thieves out of business by using common sense, always locking your car, installing anti-thief devices, and cooperating with the police by reporting any attempts at theft.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3. You are going to hear a conversation. Before you listen, please look at questions 21 to 30. Now listen to the conversation and answer questions 21 to 30. Jenny and Kevin, now I asked you to look at the case study on the marketing of JTL Foodstuffs Company as part of your exam assessment. It's remarkable because the two main products, cheese and chocolate, are well received in many countries, while still face several problems at the moment, and I want you to track how they manage it. Let's start with you, Kevin. Having read through the case study on cheese, please just summarise what problems JTL had to take on board.
Yeah, well, of course, what first came to my attention was that the main consuming countries are Italy and Germany, and JTL has a large market share in these two countries. But at present, the sales status still differs. The sales volume in Italy goes up with 13% increase rate annually, while in Germany keeps even. This is something that had many causes. On top of that immediate problem, what had also happened over the last 2 years was that, although they had invested in an expansion plan as well as a comprehensive propagation project in Germany, they had to face up to increased competition.
Yes, I think that's fair. And Jenny, you focus on the sales of chocolate. What did you find? And what did the company define as the reasons for the problems? Well, I think they've hit on the same things. In Italy, their chocolate has a loyal group of consumers, and the sales go up for 12% annually. However, in Germany, it is not so optimistic, and it has fallen 4.5% since last year. Through the investigation, I found that the marketing strategies are quite different in these two countries. In Italy, they choose to locate the stores on the nearer children's school. That is location competition. But in Germany, they just put the product on the second cheapest brand. That is price competition.
Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have 30 seconds to read questions
At the same time, their longer-term problems, which were affecting their market share, were eventually credited to poor training in Germany. Many staff haven't received formal training before entering the store, and having looked at the details in their last report, I think that's right. So, on to the larger issues then. Kevin, what do you think the company will do?
Well, obviously they have the choice of accepting the very favourable terms that another company, KMG, a local food company, has offered them to buy the sole dealership. That may mean giving up part of their management or even changing a new brand.
Well, you mustn't always assume that mask threats require dramatic solutions. Sometimes there's a simple fix, such as changing the guy at the top. But a more probable approach, and one which I think would have more chance of success, would be to alter how they're running things, the management layers and the processes. So in your analysis, try to think of all the options. Jenny?
I agree. When I was talking to the marketing manager, he said to me that he thought the company had got a great management ideal, but they haven't put it into practice, and that could cost a lot to put right.
Ah, well. In fact, what I want you two to do is to go away when we've finished our discussion today and write a report. We've looked in general at the marketing of JTL both in Italy and Germany over the last few sessions, and I want you to take JTL as an example and suggest some ways in which they might overcome their problems, and outline the reasons why you think as you do, but try and keep it intrinsic to the company rather than drag in other examples. Is that okay, Kevin?
Yes, I think I can do that. Personally, I've got great hopes for it. I think it will recover. According to my survey, I found that the quality of product itself was a dominant factor affecting the consumption in Germany. In my opinion, they should guarantee the supply of cleaning products. Meantime, change the colour of package, which can in turn arouse consumers' appetite.
I think it can recover too. In my mind, container, materials, and image are all important parts that should be attached more importance on. What's more, the company definitely needs a boost to attract more highly skilled workers if their recovery is to be long-lasting. What do you think, Kevin?
Absolutely. The advertising propagation they did in Germany was quite inadequate, and they should carry out a comprehensive plan for the extension of advertisement.
I agree with both of you about the advertising extension. That's where they could do with some innovation to get sales kick-started. Anyway, let's see what you can.
The end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You are going to hear a lecture. Questions 31 to 40 are based on the lecture. Before you listen, please look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen to the lecture and answer questions 31 to 40.
All around the edge of Africa, along the coastline, near the continent's ports, are monuments to exploitation. For example, on the island of Gori, just off the coast of Senegal, there's the slave house. This was the last place many Africans saw before being shipped off to a lifetime of slavery in America, or, just as often, to death on the high seas. There are many more places like this dating from the 350 years or so of the African slave trade. When people wonder why Africa is so poor, they need to look no further for the start of an explanation. The end of the slavery was followed by a century of colonialism. Some people argue that colonialism brought limited development, railways and schools and so on. The system was principally designed to turn Africa into a vast plantation and mining site for the profit of outsiders. Of course, Some Africans gained from this period. Chiefs who sold their enemies to the European or Arab slavers, for example, and coastal people who creamed a little off the colonial trade which flowed through their land. But on the whole, for almost half a millennium, the general rule was systematic exploitation. This must, surely, be the basic reason why Africa is poor. You could add that the climate is punishing, that tropical diseases are rife, and that today's independent African rulers are far from perfect. All true, but these factors, powerful in recent decades, seem marginal when set against to the pattern that was set for centuries. The solution has been aid, emergency aid, development aid, agricultural aid, economic advices. Billions of dollars is worth of it. The problem with this solution is that, patently, it hasn't worked. On the whole, Africa has got poorer. The failure hasn't really been the idea of real aid, but the misuse of that term. Clearly, if, in the famous phrase, you teach a man to fish, you're probably helping him. But most aid hasn't been like that. Most of it has been top-down aid, and money that's given to African governments does the political bidding of the aid givers. A good proportion of it has been creamed off by the recipient government's officials, and another large chunk of it paid back to the so-called donors in consultancy fees, salaries, cars, houses and servants for aid officials, debt repayments and the purchasing of arms. And yet, to say aid hasn't worked in the past is not the same thing as saying aid can't work. On the great scale of things, aid, or more precisely the type of aid that's generally been given in the past few decades, hasn't worked. But a little of the right sort of aid, carefully directed and monitored, would be a lifeline for them. For example, if a few $1,000s is spent on a borehole, which is a lifeline to the precious water deep underground, those farmers who live on the plantation may receive great enhancement of their life quality.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.